I was never the kind of person to start drama. At 26, I liked my peace. I kept to myself, worked a remote IT job, paid my rent on time, and built my hobbies around the quiet things, photography, hiking, and fixing up old tech, just to see if I could. My name's Keith, and I've always been the type to avoid confrontation if I could help it. But when your own family starts treating you like an ATM with a pulse, or worse, like a second-class citizen, it gets harder and harder to bite your tongue. This whole thing started with something as small as a package. Well, not that small. It was something I'd worked toward for years. A limited edition DSLR camera, mirrorless, top of the line, and custom fitted with gear I'd saved up for over 18 months to afford. This wasn't just a splurge. It was a reward. For sticking through a soul-crushing job I hated for way too long. For clawing my way out of debt. For finally moving out of my parents' place 2 years ago after they spent most of my 20s guilt-tripping me into staying to help with the house. So yeah, this camera meant something. It wasn't just a tool. It was a symbol. When it finally arrived, I didn't take it home right away. I'd had it shipped to my parents' place, which wasn't unusual. I still use their address for certain deliveries because my apartment building has a long history of, let's just say, mysterious package disappearances. I figured I'd pick it up the next day and head home. Easy. But when I walked into my parents' living room that Saturday afternoon, box cutter in hand, and saw my younger cousin Tyler sitting on the couch, feet up, PlayStation controller in hand, greasy pizza box open next to him, I should have known something was off. I should have read the room better. Tyler is 19, technically an adult, but still very much a child in every way that matters. He's lived with my parents for almost a year now. Got kicked out of his own house after dropping out of school and stealing money from his mom's purse. My parents took him in like he was some lost lamb. My mom especially. She's always had a weird soft spot for him, calling him her second son. I've lost count of how many times she's said, Tyler just needs some guidance, or boys make mistakes. Meanwhile, if I forgot to do the dishes once when I lived there, I was lazy and ungrateful. So when I walked in and saw him sitting there, I already felt the tension. But I smiled anyway, gave him a half-hearted, "What's up?" and grabbed my package off the table. That's when he spoke. "Is that the camera you were talking about?" I paused. "Yeah." Finally arrived. He raised his eyebrows like that meant something. "Dang, that's the one that's like $2,000, right?" I didn't correct him. It was actually closer to 3, all in. Something like that. He dropped the controller, wiped his hands on his hoodie, and leaned forward. "Can I see it?" Now look, I'm not a monster. I've let people use my gear before. But Tyler had a history. He's dropped and broken his own phone 3 times this year. He once spilled soda on my keyboard and just laughed. He had zero respect for anything that wasn't his. So I told him the truth. Maybe later. I haven't even opened it yet. And just like that, the vibe changed. His smile twitched. His shoulders stiffened. "Come on, Keith," he said, like we were friends. "It's not like I'm gonna break it. I know how to use a camera." I didn't want to argue. I didn't want this to turn into a thing. So I just said, "I'll show you when I've set it up." I started to walk toward the hallway where I'd left my jacket, and my mom came out of the kitchen just in time to overhear him say, "He just doesn't want to share. He never does." I froze. She chimed in immediately, tone sharp and disappointed. "Keith, just let him see it. He deserves something nice too." Deserves. I turned around. "Mom, what are you talking about?" She walked over and folded her arms like she was about to lecture a child. "You always get these expensive things and act like you're better than everyone. Tyler's been trying really hard lately. He's helping out around the house. He's looking for a job." "No, he's not." I cut in, more annoyed than angry. "You're enabling him. He sleeps all day and plays video games all night. He's not even paying rent." She gave me that look. The same one she used to give me when I refused to give up my turn on the family computer growing up. "Why do you always make everything about money, Keith?" Because it is about money. That camera cost more than I paid for my car. It took me over a year to save for it. And it's mine. Tyler was smirking now, just sitting there, soaking it all in, like he'd won something. "You know," he said casually, "I was thinking of starting a YouTube channel. I could totally use something like that." My jaw tensed. "No," I said. Firm. Direct. "It's not for sharing. It's mine. That's final." And I turned and walked to the door. I didn't even want to stay for lunch anymore. But I should have known that wasn't the end of it. Because the next day, when I came back to pick it up, it was gone. The box had been opened. The packaging ripped. The lens was scratched. The screen had a hairline crack down the middle. It wasn't just tampered with. It was destroyed. And the only people who had been in the house, Tyler and my mom. I stared at the broken camera laid out on the kitchen table, my heart pounding like I'd just run a mile. My dad, bless him, was trying to say something about accidents and misunderstandings, but I barely heard him. My hands were shaking. I turned to my mom. What happened? She didn't even look guilty. He was just trying to figure it out, she said, tone clipped. You could have shown him yourself. This wouldn't have happened if you weren't being so selfish. I swear I thought I misheard her. I'm selfish? You let him touch my stuff without permission. Don't raise your voice, Keith. It's just a camera. Just a camera. $3,000. A year of work. A symbol of everything I'd earned. And they treated it like some toy for their favorite failure to mess around with. That was the first time I said it out loud. The words had been forming in the back of my mind for years, but I never dared to speak them. You don't respect me, I said quietly. You never have. My mom rolled her eyes and walked away. Just like that. No apology. No ownership. Tyler, meanwhile, stayed in the doorway. He watched me with this smug little grin, like he'd gotten what he wanted all along. And maybe he had. But what they didn't know, was that I had footage. Security footage. Because I'd been testing my new home security system the week before. And one of the test cameras? It was in my old bedroom. Still plugged in. Still recording. I hadn't even checked it yet. But the moment I did, everything changed. And he had no idea what was coming. When I got back to my apartment that night, I didn't even turn on the lights. I just dropped my keys on the counter, sat down at my desk, and stared at the camera case on my bed. It looked like a crime scene. Splintered foam, broken lens mount, the LCD screen cracked just enough to sting every time I glanced at it. I hadn't touched anything since I brought it home. I couldn't. It felt like if I picked it up, I'd be admitting it was real, that it was truly gone. I sat there for at least 10 minutes in silence. My mind wasn't racing. It wasn't even angry. It was numb. Flat. The kind of quiet that comes before a storm, not around you, but inside. Eventually, I forced myself to open my laptop. I pulled up the app that connected to the security camera I'd installed in my old room. It had been a backup test, just something I'd set up while configuring the motion sensors before mounting them properly in my apartment. I hadn't expected to need it. But as I scrolled through the footage, timestamp after timestamp, a lump formed in my throat. There it was. Clear as day. Tyler walking into the room. Alone. He wasn't curious. He wasn't exploring. He knew what he was doing. He looked straight at the box, scanned the hallway behind him like a cartoon villain, and shut the door. Then, slowly, methodically, he opened it. He rifled through the packaging like a raccoon in a trash can. Didn't even look excited. Just entitled. Like he already believed it was his. Then came the part that made my stomach twist. He held the camera up, fumbled with the lens cap, and dropped it. Right onto the hardwood floor. He froze for a moment, then looked down and picked it up. The expression on his face wasn't regret. It wasn't panic. It was annoyance. Like the camera had dared to inconvenience him. Then he threw it onto the bed. Not placed. Threw. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part came about 5 minutes later when my mom walked in. She didn't gasp. She didn't scold. She didn't even look surprised. She walked up, saw the lens rolling slightly on the mattress, and just said, "Did you ask him first?" Tyler shrugged. He said no. My mom sighed. Well, he's always been like that. Just be careful with it. Just be careful with it. I paused the footage right there. There it was. Proof. Not just of what happened, but of what had always been true in this house. That Tyler could do anything, and Mom would find a way to shift the blame onto me. It was the same thing, over and over. When I got a scholarship, she said I was bragging around my cousins. When I saved up for my first car, she asked me why I didn't offer to help pay for Tyler's community college tuition instead. And when I moved out, after years of doing yard work, fixing the plumbing, and contributing to bills while Tyler mooched off them, she cried and said I was abandoning the family. But now she'd helped him destroy something I loved, something I earned. And that changed everything. The next few days were a fog of avoidance. I didn't answer her texts. I didn't respond to Tyler's half-hearted, "Yo bro my bad" DM on Instagram. I needed time, not to forgive them, but to figure out what I was going to do. That footage was my ace, but I wasn't going to play it too early. Instead, I started keeping track. I'd call Dad occasionally. He was the only one who seemed remotely embarrassed about what happened, and asked questions. Not directly. Just casual things. How's Tyler doing? Did he ever get that job? Mom still upset about the camera? And every time, it was the same script. Dad mumbling something vague, trying not to pick sides. He was a quiet man, kept the peace. But even he couldn't hide the tension in his voice anymore. I learned that Tyler had taken over my old room, that he'd brought in his massive gaming setup, that Mom had already ordered him a new desk, on her dime, of course. And when Dad mentioned that she was thinking about clearing out the garage so Tyler could use it as a music studio, I nearly laughed out loud. I knew what that meant. He was settling in, getting comfortable, making this house his own, and nobody was stopping him. About 2 weeks after the incident, I got the next big punch in the gut. I came home from running errands and found a letter in my mailbox. One of those plain white envelopes that somehow feel heavier than they should. I opened it without thinking. It was a birthday card. From my mom. My birthday was still 2 months away. But inside was a note, handwritten in her looping cursive. Keith, I know things have been tense lately, but I want you to remember that family is more important than things. Tyler didn't mean to upset you. He's been under a lot of pressure lately, and I think your attitude made him feel unwelcome. Maybe when you've calmed down, you'll come around and understand why I asked you to share. Love. Mom. There was a $20 bill inside. $20. After a $3,000 loss, she sent me $20 and a passive-aggressive guilt trip. I sat on my couch staring at that card for nearly half an hour. Then I tore it in half and dropped it in the trash. That was the moment I stopped waiting for an apology. It was never coming. And honestly, I didn't want one anymore. I wanted accountability. So I started planning. Not just to confront them, but to expose everything. Not to yell or argue or demand repayment. That would only feed into the same cycle we'd been stuck in for years. No, I wanted to make it undeniable. I backed up the footage to a secure drive. I edited it down. Cut out everything except the damning moments. Tyler opening the box, dropping the camera, throwing it, my mom brushing it off. I added subtitles. Cleaned up the audio. Synced timestamps. I even included a screenshot of my original receipt, with the price circled. I wasn't going to post it online. This wasn't about public shaming. It was about forcing them to see what they'd done, without being able to gaslight me or twist the story. But before I had the chance to bring it over, something else happened. Something that pushed me over the edge. I stopped by my parents' place on a Sunday afternoon. Unannounced. I figured I'd drop in, be polite, and quietly hand over a flash drive with the footage. No yelling. No drama. When I walked into the house, the door was unlocked. Voices echoed from the living room. Laughter. Music. And then I heard it. That's Keith's old one, Tyler was saying. He left it behind. I froze in the hallway. My old Sony A6400. It was sitting on the coffee table. I'd forgotten I even left it behind. It was scratched up from years of use, but it still worked. I'd planned to give it to a friend eventually. But now it had a new strap, a new lens, and Tyler was holding it like it was a trophy. I'm using it for my channel, he said. Way better than filming on my phone. Mom chuckled. Well, at least someone's making use of it. I stood there, just beyond the doorway, heart pounding in my ears. They hadn't seen me yet. That's what happens when you act like everything belongs to you, she continued. Eventually people move on. And Tyler laughed. That's when I turned around and walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't announce myself. I didn't give them the satisfaction of knowing I'd heard it. But inside, I was done. Done with pretending. Done with trying to be the bigger person. They hadn't just disrespected me. They were actively mocking me now. And that's when I knew it was time. Time to show them the footage. Time to confront them. And time to make them feel exactly how I felt when I picked up that shattered camera off the table. But what I didn't expect, what I couldn't have expected, was that when I finally played the footage for them, it wouldn't be anger I'd feel. It would be something else entirely. I didn't show them the footage right away. Not because I was scared, but because I was tired. That deep kind of tired that sinks into your bones, where even thinking about confrontation feels like wading through wet concrete. After years of keeping the peace, of being the responsible one, of biting my tongue while everyone else acted out and got a free pass, I was burned out. The betrayal over the camera was just the final straw. In a strange way, watching that footage gave me clarity. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't selfish. I'd been gaslit for years. Made to feel like I was always too sensitive, too distant, too focused on money. But the truth was staring me in the face, in grainy 1080p resolution. They didn't value me. Not as a person, not as family. So I pulled away. For the first time in my life, I fully pulled away. No weekly check-ins with dad. No birthday visits. No polite small talk at holidays. Nothing. I didn't tell them why. I didn't argue. I just stopped showing up. I expected it to feel lonely. Instead, it felt like relief. The silence was healing. I didn't realize how much I'd been carrying until I set it down. I started going for longer hikes again. Real ones, not the 45-minute de-stress walks I used to squeeze in between family visits. I picked up freelance work and upgraded my editing setup. I went to a few photography meetups downtown, something I'd always meant to do but never had the time or energy for. And most importantly, I started building again. Not just professionally, personally. I took the busted camera pieces to a repair shop, not to fix them, but to keep the lens mount. I turned it into an art piece. Mounted it on a little plaque with a label that read, "Some things break, so you can finally stop carrying them." It sat on my desk like a little beacon, a reminder that I didn't need validation from people who only loved me when I was useful. About a month into the silence, I started noticing something weird. I wasn't angry anymore. I was hungry. Hungry to prove to myself that I could thrive without them. That I wasn't the bitter, closed-off black sheep they always painted me to be. That I was more than the sum of my grudges. So I started doing something I hadn't done since college. I uploaded again. Not to social media. Not for likes. For me. I'd had a dormant YouTube channel for years. Just a few old tutorials, a couple short clips from a trip to Norway in 2019. Nothing serious. But I'd always wondered what would happen if I actually committed to it. So I picked a niche, tech gear reviews with a photography twist, and posted a video. Then another. Then another. And slowly, people started watching. The comments were small at first. "This was really clear. Thanks." Or "Wow, your B-roll is crisp." But each one felt like a drop of fuel in a tank I didn't realize had been empty. Then, out of nowhere, one video took off. A side-by-side comparison of entry-level cameras under $1,000. I'd made it using the old A6400 Tyler thought he owned now, and a borrowed Canon from a friend. I shot the whole thing in a single afternoon. No gimmicks. Just clean shots, honest thoughts, and smooth edits. In a week, it hit 40K views. That may not sound viral, but for a channel with less than 100 subscribers, that was massive. Brands started reaching out. Small ones at first, strap companies, bag startups, lens filters. Then came the affiliate deals. One company even sent me a brand new mirrorless body to review. I remember opening the box and just sitting there, stunned. It was like the universe saw what had been taken from me and handed it back tenfold. Except this time, I didn't owe it to anyone. Not my mom. Not my cousin. Not their approval. Just me. That's when the tide really started turning. Around the same time, I got a call from my aunt, Tyler's mom. The one person in the family who'd always been a little distant from the drama. We hadn't talked in years. Not since she'd moved out of state after her divorce. But she left a message. "Hey Keith, I heard about what happened. Tyler's been, well, he's been Tyler. I don't want to get in the middle of anything, but I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I know how hard you've worked. And for what it's worth, I'm proud of you." I listened to that voicemail 3 times. Then I saved it. It became another little reminder on the hard days. That not everyone in my family was blind. But things weren't completely calm, of course. Because while I was quietly rising, they were slowly crumbling. It started with the calls. At first, it was my dad. Tentative, polite. "Hey, Keith, your mom misses you. She wanted me to tell you that." I let it go to voicemail. Then came a birthday card. No money this time. Just a photo of our family from 10 years ago, taped inside. But I didn't budge. And then, 3 months after the incident, I got a message from Tyler. On Facebook, of all places. "Hey, look, I know we got off on the wrong foot. I didn't mean to break your stuff. Mom said it wasn't a big deal. But now she's saying you're making her sick with stress and everything. And she might sell the house if this keeps up. Just let it go, man. Let it go. Let it go. Let it go." Those 3 words echoed in my head for days. That's what they always wanted. For me to let it go. For me to be the one who swallows the damage, smooths things over, carries the weight so nobody else has to feel guilty. But this time, no. Because while I was rebuilding my life, while I was finding new confidence and community and meaning, they were still stuck in the same toxic loop. Coddling Tyler. Guilt-tripping me. pretending like my silence was the problem instead of their behavior. So I decided it was finally time. Time to show them the truth. Not for revenge, not for satisfaction, for closure. One afternoon, I printed a still frame from the footage, Tyler holding the broken lens in his hand. I slipped it into an envelope with a USB drive and a note that simply said, "You always said I make things up. Here's the proof I never needed to give you. I hope someday you choose to change. Until then, I'll be doing just fine without you." I mailed it to their house, and then I blocked them. Every single one. Facebook, Instagram, email, phone. I didn't expect to thank you. I didn't even expect a reply, but I did expect silence. What I got instead was chaos. It started with a voicemail from my dad. It came 3 days after I dropped the envelope into the mailbox. A rainy Wednesday morning I still remember because I'd just wrapped filming a review on a new LED light panel and was editing in my dim kitchen with a mug of too strong coffee. My phone buzzed, and when I saw his name, I froze. He never called twice in a row, but this time he left a message. "Keith, I don't know what's going on. Your mom's really upset. She's been crying all morning. Something about a video? She says you're trying to ruin the family. Please call me back." I didn't. Instead, I listened again, rewound it, listened to his tone. The confusion, the fear, not anger, but the unmistakable sound of a man caught between a lie and the truth and realizing the line is starting to crack. They had watched it. They had finally seen it. The video, the proof, all of it. And they couldn't argue this time. They couldn't twist my words. Couldn't say I was exaggerating. Couldn't blame it on miscommunication. It was right there. Their golden boy dropping my camera like it was nothing. My mother brushing it off with all the warmth of a DMV clerk. My receipt. My silence. A full minute and a half of undeniable betrayal. And now they had to live with it. But what they didn't realize, what they still didn't seem to understand, was that this wasn't revenge. Not yet. This was just the opening move. Because while they were scrambling to put out the fire, I was quietly collecting gasoline. See, in the months after I cut them off, I kept tabs. Not obsessively, just enough. I still had friends in town, neighbors, a few extended family members who knew to keep their texts casual. They didn't even have to report back. I just let them talk. And from those conversations, I started to see the cracks forming. Apparently, Tyler had been bragging about his new YouTube career, telling people he was an influencer now, asking for sponsorships from local businesses, real estate agents, a vape shop, even a pizza place I used to work at in college, promising them exposure in exchange for cash or gear. Except he didn't have a channel. Not really. He'd made 3 videos, all filmed on my old camera. One was a room tour where he referred to his stolen setup as his professional rig. One was a cringy music video in his garage that somehow featured 3 slow-motion vape tricks and a broken light bulb. And one was him reacting to haters, which I'm pretty sure meant me, because at one point he actually said, "If you don't support your family, don't expect them to support you." The irony made me laugh so hard I nearly dropped my phone. But the real kicker? He had the gall to tag me in one of his Instagram stories. A blurry shot of the A6400 on a tripod, captioned, "Some people just don't know how to use their blessings." Glad I claimed mine. I saved the screenshot, filed it away, not out of spite, out of strategy. Because here's the thing. When someone burns your bridge, you can either swim back across the ashes or build something bigger and better and charge them a toll to cross it later. And I had just the blueprint in mind. I started by reaching out to a lawyer. Not a big, flashy firm. Just a quiet solo attorney a friend of mine used for a copyright case last year. I told him the story, showed him the footage, the screenshots, the receipts. I made it clear I didn't want to sue. Not yet. I just wanted to know my options. He was quiet for a long moment after watching the video. Then he said, "They owe you." I asked, "You mean morally?" He smiled. "Legally. Turns out, the camera was covered under small claims because the damage was both deliberate and caught on camera. Not only that, but Tyler posting pictures of it after the incident, with captions implying it was his, strengthened the argument for damages. Possibly even theft. Now, the lawyer said, we could go nuclear. Civil suit, public notice, cease and desist. But if you're looking for a clean, controlled message." He leaned back and tapped his pen on the desk. "Send a demand letter. Certified. Lay it out. The cost. The proof. The expectation. And make it clear that if they don't respond appropriately, Then we escalate. I liked the sound of that, but I wasn't quite ready to send it. Not yet, because there was still one piece missing from the puzzle. Leverage. I didn't want to just make them pay. I wanted to make them acknowledge what they'd done. Not just the camera, but the years of guilt tripping, favoritism, manipulation. All of it. And then, one day, it dropped right into my lap. I got a call from my old high school friend, Nate. We'd been loosely in touch. He ran a local podcast now, interviewing small creators, artists, and tech entrepreneurs. I'd turned down a few invites, just not ready to talk about my family stuff on air. But this time, he called with a different offer. "Hey man," he said, "I just landed a collaboration with GearStack." I sat up straighter. GearStack was huge. One of the biggest camera accessory distributors in the country. I'd bought half my old gear from them. "They're doing a YouTube spotlight thing," he continued. "Looking for small creators who are blowing up. I showed them your channel. They loved it." I blinked. "Wait, what?" "They want to feature you. Interview, studio shoot, the works. Their channel's got, like, 800K subs. It's legit." My mouth went dry. This wasn't just a win. This was proof. Proof that I wasn't some petty grudge holder. That I wasn't bitter. That I was thriving. That I had built something without them. I said yes. Of course I did. The interview was scheduled for the following month. And in the meantime, I got to work crafting my statement, the one I'd send with the demand letter. It wasn't a rant. It wasn't dramatic. It was surgical. I broke it down into 3 parts. The facts. A clear, time-stamped summary of what happened. The damage. The refusal to take responsibility. The attempt to pass it off. The costs. The price of the camera. The time lost. The replacement gear I had to acquire. The footage and proof, all documented in a shared folder. The expectations. A formal request for reimbursement. An apology in writing. And a written acknowledgement that they would cease using or referencing any gear of mine, including footage or photos. If they agreed, I'd consider the matter closed. If not, I'd file in small claims and forward everything, including the screenshots and video, to my growing network of sponsors and collaborators. I even included a small clause at the end. Any attempt to retaliate, defame, or misrepresent the situation will be met with immediate legal escalation and public disclosure. It wasn't about drama. It was about closure. I sealed the envelope, had it notarized, and sent certified mail. And then I waited. But the best part? I wasn't waiting nervously. I was waiting ready. Because I knew something they didn't. In 2 weeks, that GearStack interview would go live. In 2 weeks, my name would be associated with a major tech brand. In 2 weeks, anyone who looked up Keith, last name, would see a well-lit, professionally shot feature on a rising creator who turned his passion into something powerful. Not a victim, not a scapegoat, not a bitter older cousin who couldn't share, but a builder. And by then, they'd realized they'd bet on the wrong horse. 2 weeks later, the GearStack interview dropped. It was simple, clean, and more powerful than I'd expected. The video started with some B-roll of me walking through downtown with my camera bag, then cut to me sitting in a bright studio with a brick backdrop, talking about what got me into photography. No drama, no family, just craft. But there was one moment that landed harder than anything else. Nate, who was hosting the interview, leaned forward and asked, "If you had one message for someone struggling to be seen, someone stuck in a toxic situation where their efforts aren't being appreciated, what would you say?" I didn't hesitate. Leave. Walk away. You don't owe loyalty to people who only love you when you're useful. That clip was pulled and posted separately on GearStack's Instagram. It went mini viral. Over 80K likes, dozens of comments, and thousands of shares. A few people tagged their exes. Some tagged old bosses. And a handful tagged family members. I didn't tag anyone. I didn't have to. Because 3 days after that post went live, my mom emailed me. A real email. No passive-aggressive jabs. No guilt. Just 5 words. "Can we please talk, Keith?" For a moment, I considered ignoring it. But then I thought about everything I'd worked toward, everything I'd earned, and realized this wasn't about her anymore. It was about me. About finishing the story. About closing the door properly instead of just walking away from it. So I replied, "You can talk. I'll listen." We met at a small cafe downtown. Neutral ground. I got there first, ordered a tea, and waited. I was calm, centered. She arrived 10 minutes late, looking tired. Older than I remembered. She sat down across from me, not making eye contact at first. I watched the video, she said quietly. The one you sent. And the interview. I nodded. She swallowed. I didn't know it was that serious. I mean, I thought it was just a misunderstanding. I let the silence sit. She looked up at me, finally. Her eyes were glassy. I messed up. There it was. I didn't nod. I didn't say it's okay. I just let her continue. I always try to keep the peace, she said. Your dad doesn't like conflict. And Tyler, he was so lost after his dad left. I felt like I had to protect him, even if it meant hurting me. I asked, voice steady. She blinked. I didn't think of it that way. But yes, that was the first honest thing she'd said to me in years. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Do you know how long I waited for you to say that? She looked down. I'm sorry. I nodded once. Thank you. There was a long pause. I sent Tyler the video too, she said. And the demand letter. He laughed at first. Thought it was a joke. But when he realized you weren't bluffing, he panicked. I raised an eyebrow. How panicked? He tried to sell the camera, she said. Your old one. The one you left behind. I sat back. Of course he did. But the pawn shop wouldn't take it. Because your name was engraved under the battery plate. You remember doing that. I smiled faintly. I do. She looked both defeated and impressed. He threw a fit. Screamed that you were ruining his life. Said he was going to sue you for defamation. That made me laugh out loud. Let him try. He won't, she said. Not after your father told him we're not covering for him anymore. Not financially. Not legally. Nothing. That surprised me. Dad said that. She nodded. You sent the letter to both of us. He saw the receipts. He saw the footage. He couldn't deny it anymore. What did Tyler do? Packed a bag. Moved in with one of his friends. Said we betrayed him. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. She looked at me, eyes rimmed red. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I thought you should know. We're finally done making excuses for him. I sipped my tea. What about me? She tilted her head. What about your excuses? I asked. She winced. I don't have any left. Another silence. Then she said, I'll repay you. For the camera. Every cent. I know it won't erase what happened, but it's the least I can do. I shook my head slowly. I don't want your money. She looked confused. Then what do you want? I leaned in slightly. I want you to sit with the discomfort. I want you to feel the silence that comes when the person you overlooked chooses themselves for once. I want you to understand that this is what accountability feels like. She sat back, stunned. I stood. Thank you for meeting me, I said. But we're done here. I walked out. And that was the last time I spoke to her. Because revenge isn't always about destruction. Sometimes it's about departure. About refusing to carry what someone else broke. About choosing peace. Not because they gave it to you, but because you built it yourself. Tyler never reached out again. He tried to post a rant on Instagram once, claiming his family had turned against him, but it got maybe 14 likes. Eventually, he deleted it. Last I heard, he was working part-time at a car wash and still trying to sell beats online. My dad emailed me a month later. He didn't say much, just told me he respected the way I handled things. That he was proud. That if I ever wanted to talk, his door was open. I appreciated it. But I didn't go back. I had new doors now. By the end of the year, my YouTube channel crossed 100,000 subscribers. Gearstack offered me a partnership deal. I signed with a creator agency that helped me land paid reviews, sponsorships, even a speaking gig at a tech conference. I moved into a bigger apartment, framed the plaque with the broken lens, and hung it above my new editing desk. And one day, while filming a new video, I looked into the camera and said, your value is not determined by the people who failed to see it. That clip went viral, too. And this time, I tagged myself. Because I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't waiting for anyone to believe in me. I already had everything I needed. And when you finally stop asking for permission, that's when you start to win. For real this time. After I lost my job, my parents told me to figure it out like everyone else, while quietly giving my cousin their old car and helping him move across town. At Thanksgiving, my mom said, we don't have time for your problems. I didn't say a word, but when I left that night, I was already planning how to turn the tables. 6 weeks later, they were. Hey Reddit, I'm Ethan, 38, and I never thought I'd be writing a post like this about my own family. I've always believed family should be your safe place, your backup when life goes sideways. But this past couple of months shattered that illusion for me in a way I never saw coming. Let me back up a bit. I'd been working at a mid-sized marketing firm for about 5 years. Not a high-flying job, but steady and respectable enough. I'm not someone who's ever been super ambitious about climbing corporate ladders, but I liked what I did. Then in early September, out of nowhere, the company downsized, and I was one of the people let go. No warning, no golden parachute, just a cold email and a last day meeting. Losing the job was a gut punch. I wasn't sure how long it would take to find something else, but I started applying everywhere. I kept my parents updated, hoping for some encouragement or at least a bit of understanding. I got nothing like that. The first time I saw them after losing the job, I mentioned it casually during dinner. My dad barely looked up from his plate and muttered, "You're not a kid anymore. Figure it out like everyone else." My mom nodded in agreement, adding, "We've got our own problems. We can't babysit you." I was stunned. I had always been close with them, or so I thought. But suddenly, my struggles were a burden they didn't want. I swallowed my pride and left the topic alone. Maybe they just didn't know what to say? But the real kicker was what I found out shortly after. Through a cousin's careless comment at a family gathering, I learned that my parents had given their old car, a reliable but well-worn sedan that had been their daily driver for years, to Darren. Darren is my cousin, 15 years younger than me, and the golden child in the family. He dropped out of college twice, has never held a steady job, and yet somehow always managed to get whatever he wanted from my parents. It wasn't just the car. Over the next few weeks, I caught whispers about how my parents helped Darren move into a new apartment across town. They came with a moving truck, packed up his things, and bought him a nice dinner afterward. No mention of any of this was made to me. I found out piecemeal, like I was an outsider looking in. Meanwhile, I was scraping by, working a few freelance gigs, scouring job boards, and trying not to panic about rent and bills. I called them a couple of times to update them, but the conversations were short, clipped, and filled with vague excuses about being busy or stressed. I began to realize my parents weren't just indifferent, they were actively prioritizing Darren over me. Thanksgiving was the final straw. I almost didn't go. I debated skipping it to save myself the discomfort, but my mom called a few days before and said, "It's important for family to be together." So I went. The dinner was tense from the start. Darren showed up with his new girlfriend, freshly back from some weekend getaway funded, no doubt, by my parents. They barely glanced at me the whole night. When I finally tried to steer the conversation toward my job search, my mom snapped, "We don't have time for your problems tonight. Let's just enjoy ourselves." That was it. No empathy, no encouragement. Just a cold dismissal in front of everyone. I ate my meal quietly, said good night as soon as I could, and left without a word. Driving home, I was numb at first, but then something shifted. I realized that if I stayed passive, nothing would change. I wasn't going to be invisible or forgotten. I had to find a way to make them see me, not just as their son, but as someone they couldn't ignore or push aside. That night, I started making plans. Nothing dramatic, no shouting matches or confrontations. Just a slow, steady way to take back control. The night I left Thanksgiving dinner, I didn't speak a word to my parents, but my mind was racing. I knew I had to stop being the invisible son who they could brush off whenever it suited them. For years, Darren had been their favorite, the kid who never had to earn anything but got everything handed to him. And I was supposed to just watch, silent and grateful? No, that wasn't going to happen. The first step was to figure out what they were doing behind my back, what favors, what handouts Darren was getting. I started paying closer attention. It was subtle at first, overhearing my mom on the phone with some property manager about a new lease for Darren's place, catching my dad talking about a special arrangement to cover some bills. Every time I asked directly, they'd either dodge or tell me it was none of my business. I realized they saw me as a problem to avoid, not a son to support. Meanwhile, my own job hunt dragged on. A few interviews, nothing solid. I was working odd freelance gigs to pay rent, but the stress was piling up. I kept reminding myself I'd never ask them for money. That wasn't the point. I just wanted respect, recognition, even a little encouragement. One afternoon, I decided to stop playing nice. I arranged a casual visit with my parents, just to talk. I knew it was risky. I figured they'd dismiss me again or get angry, but I had to try. When I showed up at their house, I found Darren there, lounging on the couch like it was his home, which, for all practical purposes, it had become. My mom greeted me with that sharp smile that barely reached her eyes and said, "Oh, Ethan, Darren's moving some boxes today, so we're helping him get settled." I nodded, forcing a smile, and asked, So, this is all happening while I'm out here struggling to find work. Her smile disappeared, replaced by a cold look I hadn't seen before. We help who we can. You have to stand on your own 2 feet. That cut deeper than I expected. I took a deep breath. I get that, but it feels like you're doing everything for Darren and nothing for me. He's had so many chances to mess up, and you just bail him out. I'm trying to build my own path, and I get told to figure it out like everyone else, but I don't feel like I'm even in the same family. My dad appeared from the kitchen, arms crossed. Maybe if you worked harder, you wouldn't be in this situation. I shook my head. It's not about working harder. It's about feeling like you care. There was silence. Then my mom said, "We don't owe you anything. You're an adult." I left soon after, furious but strangely determined. That was when I started putting my plan into motion. Step 1. Reclaim their respect by showing them I was not helpless or dependent. Step 2. Make it impossible for them to pretend I didn't exist. Step 3. Hold them accountable for how they treated me. I started small, first by reaching out to old contacts in my industry, rebuilding my network quietly. But the biggest move was when I got wind that my parents had quietly transferred the title of their second, newer car to Darren as well, the fancy one they had bought just a year before. That car was worth more than any raise I'd ever gotten. I called the local DMV to check the records. Sure enough, the title was under Darren's name. I had never been told anything about it. So, I made a decision. I would remind my parents that I wasn't invisible, and I had resources they were ignoring. Next, I rented a modest office space under my own name. Nothing flashy, but enough to look legitimate to anyone who saw it. I told my contacts I was launching a freelance consultancy, gathering clients little by little. And then I started inviting people, local business folks, neighbors, even distant family, to meet and greet, events at the office. Nothing big, just casual lunches or coffee meetings where I talked about my work and my vision. Slowly, word got around. One day, at a neighborhood market, I bumped into my uncle, who hadn't seen me since the job loss. He looked surprised when I told him about the office and the clients I'd signed. "I had no idea you were doing all this," he said, genuinely impressed. "That's the idea," I said with a smile. "I'm not waiting for anyone's help." I could feel my confidence growing. More importantly, my parents were starting to hear about it. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. A few days before Thanksgiving, I received an unexpected call from a business associate of my parents. Apparently, word of my little enterprise had made its way to their social circle, and some of their friends were curious. The caller was polite but clear. "Linda and Gary are not pleased. They don't appreciate you making a spectacle of yourself, especially with Darren moving on with their gifts while you're out here trying to show up the family." I laughed softly. "I'm not trying to show anyone up. I just want to be recognized." "Oh, you'll get recognition, all right," the voice said with a hint of warning. Thanksgiving arrived, and I was ready. I wasn't going to beg or plead. I wasn't going to fall silent again. When I walked into their house, I could feel the shift. My parents' smiles were tight, their eyes sharp. Darren was there, of course, acting like he owned the place. Dinner started, and I held my ground. When the conversation inevitably turned to me, I said calmly, "Since losing my job, I've started my own consultancy. I've signed several clients and rented office space downtown. I'm not here to ask for help, but to show that I'm not giving up." My mom's face twitched. "We don't have time for your problems tonight," she said coldly, the same line she'd used weeks before. But this time, I didn't back down. "I'm not here with problems," I said. "I'm here with results." That night, the tension was palpable. My parents barely spoke to me after that, and Darren avoided looking my way altogether. I left knowing the real battle had just begun. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I was ready. 6 weeks after that Thanksgiving, my life had shifted in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. I was still running my consultancy, slowly but steadily growing a small client base. More importantly, I'd gained something I'd been starving for: confidence and control. But the real change was how my parents reacted, or rather, how they didn't react. At first, the silence from them was deafening. No calls, no messages. Even Darren avoided family events like the plague, probably sensing the shift in the household power dynamics. But my parents? They weren't the type to admit defeat or to quietly watch their perfect image crumble. No, they had to strike back, and they had their own tools. The first sign came during a casual weekend gathering. My aunt, who's always been tight with my parents, cornered me away from the group. I don't know what you think you're doing, Ethan, she hissed, voice low but sharp. You're making things difficult. Your parents are worried, and you're stirring up drama where none needs to be. I looked at her levelly. I'm just standing up for myself. She scoffed. Standing up? You're trying to embarrass them. You think they owe you something they don't. I said nothing, but the message was clear. The family was rallying to isolate me. Then, the real trouble started with my freelance contracts. Out of nowhere, some clients I'd been in talks with suddenly went cold. One after another, calls stopped returning. Emails vanished into thin air. I'd built these connections slowly and honestly, so the sudden freeze was suspicious. I did some digging and discovered a few local business owners, all friends or acquaintances of my parents, had been subtly discouraged from working with me. The classic family loyalty thing, used as a weapon. It stung, but it also confirmed what I'd suspected. My parents were not only ignoring me, they were actively sabotaging my progress. I decided to fight fire with fire. I started quietly documenting everything. Canceled contracts, odd calls, overheard conversations. I gathered proof that my parents' circle was interfering with my business. Next, I made moves to diversify my network beyond my hometown and family sphere. I reached out online, cold emailed distant contacts, and worked weekends to build a new client list outside the local scene. Slowly, I rebuilt my momentum, but the real turning point came when I took a step that shook my parents to their core. Remember that old family house where my parents had lived for decades? The one they'd always talked about passing down to Darren as soon as he got his act together? Well, it turned out there were some serious unpaid taxes and liens on the property, something my parents had kept quiet. I got wind of it from a mutual acquaintance, and after some digging, I discovered the house was close to being seized by the city. I contacted a real estate lawyer, just for information at first, and found out I could potentially step in to resolve the liens if I put up some funds or worked out a payment plan. This was my chance. I approached my parents under the guise of concern. I said I'd heard about the tax issues and wanted to help them keep the house in the family. They looked surprised but wary. Of course, I had no intention of just helping. The plan was to leverage the situation to make them face the consequences of their neglect and favoritism. I began by quietly negotiating with the city's tax office, proposing to cover the back taxes in exchange for being added to the title as a co-owner. When I told my parents, their reaction was pure disbelief. "How did you even find out about this?" my dad demanded, voice rising. "I did some research," I said calmly. "I'm trying to help keep the house from being lost." My mom was visibly shaken. "We never wanted Darren to have that burden. He's just getting started in life." I shook my head. "You were so busy giving him everything that you forgot about responsibility. The house is in danger because you weren't managing it." From there, the tension exploded. My parents realized I wasn't just trying to help. I was taking control. They tried to resist, threatening legal action, but I was ready. I had a lawyer on retainer now, and I presented everything. The unpaid taxes, the liens, the transfer attempts for the cars to Darren, and the way they'd sidelined me for years. I told them I wasn't interested in petty revenge. I just wanted fairness, a seat at the table, recognition for my efforts and sacrifices. For the first time, they looked rattled. The family meetings grew tense and icy. Darren barely showed up. My parents started to argue in hushed tones, trying to strategize how to keep control. But I had momentum. Around the same time, I started hosting events at my office. Invitations went out to business owners, neighbors, even distant relatives who hadn't taken sides yet. The office became a hub for networking and support, a symbol that I was no longer the invisible son, but a force to be reckoned with. My parents found out about the events and weren't happy. They accused me of airing family drama in public, but no one listened. My support was growing. The final straw came when Darren came to me, awkward and unsure. "I don't know what you're trying to do," he said, voice low. "But Mom and Dad are freaking out. This is tearing the family apart." I looked him in the eye. "I'm not trying to tear anything apart. I'm just making sure they don't forget I exist." He shook his head and walked away. The weeks after Darren's uneasy visit only strengthened my resolve to see this through. Every conversation, every interaction with my parents felt like walking on thin ice. They were panicking, and I could sense it, not just in the way they talked to each other behind closed doors, but in the subtle cracks showing through their carefully maintained facade. For years, they'd been so confident that ignoring me was easy. that I'd just fall in line or disappear. But their silence had made their position fragile, almost brittle, and I wasn't about to let them pretend I didn't exist any longer. I doubled down on the legal front with the house. After numerous consultations with my lawyer, who was sharp and no-nonsense, I formally submitted a petition to the local tax office. I offered to pay off the outstanding liens on the property in exchange for partial ownership. It was a calculated move. I wasn't just rescuing a building. I was inserting myself into a place they'd long claimed was off-limits to me. When I informed my parents, their reaction was immediate and predictable: outrage. They accused me of overstepping, of trying to take what wasn't mine. But they had underestimated how far I was willing to go. The tax office, tired of years of unpaid debts and no action from the owners, welcomed my proposal. I was the only one who cared enough to step up. Securing ownership wasn't just a victory on paper. It felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I immediately started organizing repairs and maintenance on the house. This was something my parents had neglected for years, leaving the place to fall into disrepair as if it was some inconvenient burden. I arranged for contractors, oversaw the work, and even started planting flowers in the neglected garden. More importantly, I made it clear that any future decisions regarding the property would include me. No more secrets, no more decisions behind my back. While managing this, I threw myself even harder into building my business outside their shadow. I diversified my client base, connected with new contacts online and in other cities, and kept my focus on steady, sustainable growth. The rejection from my family and the sabotage they tried to orchestrate had hurt, but it no longer defined me. I was carving out a path of my own, and every new contract, every satisfied client was proof that I could succeed on my own terms. The next Thanksgiving was different. The invitations came with hesitation, wrapped in carefully neutral tones. They weren't sure if they wanted me there. I accepted, but on one clear condition: no silence. No sweeping years of pain and neglect under the rug. I needed my voice to be heard, and for once, the truth to be in the room. Sitting at the dinner table, the atmosphere was thick with tension. It wasn't the stunned silence of previous years, but something heavier: expectation, waiting, like everyone was bracing for impact. I spoke honestly and calmly. I told them how I had been sidelined for so many years, how their favoritism for Darren left me struggling in the shadows. I detailed the work I'd done to save the family house, how I'd fought to be recognized not just as the problem child, but as someone who deserved respect and a stake in the family's future. My mother's eyes narrowed, sharp and cold. "You think you're better than us now? Don't be foolish." My father's voice was dismissive but strained. "We gave Darren every opportunity. You made your own choices." I shook my head slowly, meeting their eyes. "No. You made your choices when you decided who deserved your support and who didn't. I'm here to say those choices have consequences." Darren, who usually basked in the glow of parental approval, looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting away from mine. The room was no longer filled with awkward avoidance or polite nods. Instead, it was thick with discomfort because the truth was undeniable. For once, I wasn't the one being silenced. I wasn't there to ask for forgiveness. I didn't want to mend bridges that were burned long ago. What I wanted, and finally got, was respect. Recognition that I was a person, not a problem to be hidden or ignored. After that night, the dynamics shifted. My parents retreated from their attempts to control me. They kept Darren close in their bubble of entitlement and denial, but I was no longer part of that world. Our family gatherings became fewer, more strained. When they did happen, I stayed guarded, refusing to let old wounds open or give them the satisfaction of control. I protected myself by setting boundaries they couldn't cross. Meanwhile, my business grew steadily. What had started as a shaky venture became stable and reliable enough for me to support myself comfortably. The house I partly owned was no longer a neglected relic, but a testament to my persistence and determination. I never forgave my parents for their years of neglect and blatant favoritism. Why would I? They made their choices, and I made mine. They chose to live in an entitled world, clinging to Darren as if that alone could shield them from the consequences of their actions. Me? I built a life where I was seen and valued, not because of who they wanted me to be, but because of who I chose to become. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you like this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. I'm Jack, 28, and I've been feeling like a ghost in my own family for as long as I can remember. Growing up, my parents always made it painfully obvious who the favorite was, and it wasn't me. My younger brother, Kyle, has been treated like he's some sort of golden child from the moment he was born, and I guess I was supposed to just accept that my achievements, my hard work, and even my dreams were somehow less important because I didn't have a family of my own yet. It's funny because I actually do have a family. My life isn't empty, but apparently, in their eyes, not being married with kids makes me invisible, or maybe just expendable. The latest incident happened over what should have been a routine family dinner. My dad, in his usual pompous tone, had the gall to lay it all out in front of everyone. "Jack, you're too young to understand, but your brother deserves the inheritance. He has a family. He has responsibilities. You'll have your time someday." Everyone nodded. Everyone agreed. My Aunt Lisa even smiled at him like he was some kind of visionary. I felt my stomach twist, half with frustration and half with this dull, familiar pain that always comes when my family talks about me like I'm a guest in my own home. I stayed quiet, sipping my water, pretending I didn't hear them. But inside, I was boiling. Every word felt like a slap. The way my father phrased it, my brother's life mattered more than mine. My accomplishments, my struggles, my late nights working to save money for my own apartment, nothing counted. It was like I had to watch from the sidelines as everyone celebrated Kyle for just being married and having 2 kids. My Aunt Lisa leaned forward, eyes glinting with curiosity, clearly waiting for me to show some sort of gratitude or at least acknowledgement. But I didn't. Instead, I opened my laptop. I wanted to keep calm, wanted to appear casual, like I wasn't about to throw a wrench into their perfect little moral hierarchy. But inside, I had a plan forming, a plan to make them realize that the way they've treated me, the way they've underestimated me, would have consequences. The screen lit up my face, casting a pale glow as my fingers hovered over the keyboard. "Interesting you mentioned family," I muttered under my breath, just loud enough for my brother to hear. His smug grin faltered slightly, and I knew I had his attention. "Because here's something you might not remember about your last inheritance." The room fell quiet. My dad's eyebrows shot up. Aunt Lisa leaned closer, peering at the screen with a frown. Kyle's confident posture wavered for a second, as if sensing that the narrative they had built around him, the perfect son, the deserving one, might be about to crack. I kept my tone calm, deliberate, letting the tension hang in the air. I didn't yell, didn't accuse, didn't plead. I just clicked, and suddenly, a series of images and documents filled the screen. Proof of how Kyle had squandered his last inheritance on a series of reckless investments, risky purchases, and a few questionable business ventures that had lost him more money than I'd ever seen him earn. There was a pause, just long enough for the silence to press on everyone's chest. Aunt Lisa's hand hovered near her mouth, eyes widening as she scrolled through the evidence. My dad opened his mouth, probably ready to try and save face, but I raised a finger, signaling him to hold. "You all mentioned family, right?" I said, my voice steady, almost casual, though my pulse was racing. "Let's talk about how Kyle treated his family responsibilities the last time he was entrusted with something important." I watched as disbelief slowly replaced confidence across the table. Kyle's eyes darted from me to the screen, then back to my dad, trying to find some support, some excuse. But the proof was undeniable. Receipts, contracts, even photos of the events that led to him losing a significant portion of his inheritance. They all told the story that my family had somehow missed. The irony was almost delicious. All those lectures about responsibility, all the times they compared me unfavorably to him, all the nods and approving smiles at his maturity and family sense, they were staring at a man who had mismanaged what he'd been given, while the so-called invisible son had been quietly building his own life, responsibly and independently. Aunt Lisa finally spoke, her voice tight with tension. "Jack, where did you get these?" Her eyes flicked nervously between me and Kyle. My dad's hands clenched around his fork, knuckles white, and for the first time in years, I saw hesitation in his eyes. Kyle's mouth opened, closed, opened again, as if trying to come up with an explanation, but none came. I leaned back, letting the moment stretch. I didn't need to say more. I had planted the seed. The look on their faces was confirmation enough that the perfect narrative they had built around Kyle, the one where I was unworthy, invisible, and undeserving, was crumbling. I don't know if they realized it yet, but this was just the beginning. They might have thought they could dismiss me, overlook my achievements, and heap praise on my brother while treating me like an afterthought. But now, the tables were subtly turning. I wasn't going to ruin anyone in a tantrum, and I wasn't going to beg for recognition. I had something better. The truth, undeniable and painfully visible, sitting right in front of them on a screen. And as I sat there, watching my father's smug confidence falter, I realized something else. This wasn't just about money or inheritance. It was about acknowledgement, about finally being seen in a family that had spent decades pretending I didn't matter. I had their attention now, and I intended to make the most of it. Slowly, deliberately, I closed my laptop, letting the click echo in the tense silence. Well, I said lightly. Interesting to see how family responsibilities can play out differently depending on the person, isn't it? No one said anything at first. The weight of the evidence lingered in the air like a storm ready to break. Kyle's lips twitched, probably trying to find a way to salvage his image. My dad's jaw tightened, and Aunt Lisa's eyes narrowed as she glanced at me, a mix of suspicion and unease. And that's when I knew. The family dinner had just shifted from a polite, obligatory gathering to the beginning of something much larger. Something that I would carefully orchestrate. Something they would never forget. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, and I didn't lose control. I just let them stew in the reality I'd laid before them. And as I quietly sipped my water, pretending to be calm, I felt a thrill of satisfaction. The first seed of doubt had been planted, and from here, the story was only going to get more complicated. They had underestimated me for years, assumed I was naive, assumed I would accept my lesser role without question. But now, they were going to see that the invisible son had been quietly watching, quietly planning, and quietly waiting for the right moment to challenge everything they thought they knew. I smiled faintly, letting my expression be calm, almost innocent. But inside, my mind was racing with possibilities. There would be conversations, confrontations, and probably some very awkward family gatherings in the future. Kyle would squirm, my dad would fume, and Aunt Lisa, well, she would probably try to play peacemaker, but I could already tell she would be on edge. And the best part? I hadn't even begun my real move yet. This dinner was just the setup. As I pushed back my chair, preparing to leave the table with a casual grace, I glanced at my brother one last time. His confident posture had vanished, replaced by a tight, controlled tension that betrayed how rattled he actually was. My dad avoided my gaze completely, staring down at his plate as if he could will the embarrassment away. Aunt Lisa's sharp eyes lingered on me, and I knew she was already asking herself how she had failed to see this coming. And in that quiet, charged moment, I realized something crucial. The story my family had written about me, the story where I was insignificant, unworthy, and invisible, was about to be rewritten. I didn't need to raise my voice, make a scene, or beg for respect. All I needed was patience, strategy, and a little bit of their own arrogance working against them. After that dinner, things didn't just simmer down, they boiled over. It was as if the little crack I had created in their carefully constructed family narrative had enraged them, though they couldn't openly admit it. The next few weeks were unbearable, a combination of passive-aggressive remarks, cold shoulders, and thinly veiled lectures disguised as concern. Every interaction became a minefield, and my own house, where I usually felt safe, started to feel like a refuge I had to retreat to more often. The favoritism toward Kyle intensified almost immediately. It was subtle at first, Dad asking Kyle for advice about investments, praising him in conversations with friends, or sending him texts about family matters before even bothering to mention them to me. Then it escalated. During a weekend family barbecue, my father handed Kyle a brand new car key with a grin, saying, "For someone with responsibilities, unlike some of us." My stomach turned, my hands clenched, but I forced a smile and congratulated him. I felt the humiliation wrap around me like a thick fog as everyone else cheered and my father patted Kyle on the back. I wasn't even allowed a word of recognition for the promotion I'd just gotten at work, which had taken years of effort. Aunt Lisa was no better. She started making passive comments whenever we were together, little jabs hidden under the guise of concern. "Jack, don't you think you should focus more on settling down? You know, family comes first." I'd smile tightly, nod, and walk away, but inside I was seething. Every word was a reminder that, to them, My accomplishments meant nothing, and I was still just a placeholder until I conformed to their expectations. Even my mother, who I thought might have some loyalty to me, had begun echoing their sentiment. She would glance at Kyle with pride while brushing past me, saying things like, "I just hope you'll understand someday, Jack. He's been through a lot more than you realize." It was condescending, and I wanted nothing more than to tell her that I understood perfectly, and that her words hurt more than any insult ever could. Then came the betrayal. It was subtle, almost accidental in the way they delivered it, but the impact was devastating. My brother had invited me over under the guise of showing me his new business venture, a joint investment with some local entrepreneurs. I had cautiously agreed, thinking maybe this was a chance to reconnect, to at least be included in a family conversation without judgment. I knocked on his door, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach, and was greeted with his usual smug grin. "Jack, glad you could make it," he said, gesturing toward the living room where a few other family members were already seated. "Dad mentioned you might be interested." His tone was light, almost mocking, but I forced myself to return a neutral smile. The room was full of people, mostly my father's friends and some distant relatives I barely recognized. They were all nodding toward me politely, but I could feel the weight of their judgment, the silent understanding that I didn't belong here, that I was just a visitor observing the real family in action. Kyle leaned back on the sofa, the picture of composure, while I was offered a chair at the far end of the room. As the conversation started, I realized too late what was happening. Kyle was presenting his new venture like he was some kind of visionary, speaking confidently about investments, partnerships, and the projected returns. But as he spoke, I noticed discrepancies, things that didn't add up, errors he had obviously overlooked or intentionally misrepresented. My heart sank when I saw him subtly passing around documents that weren't just misleading, they were outright manipulations of previous agreements. And then it hit me. He had involved my father and aunt in this scheme without telling me, making me look like the outsider once again. I tried to intervene politely at first, pointing out the errors, asking for clarifications, but every time I spoke, he would brush me off, smirk, or turn the conversation toward some joke about me being out of touch or not understanding the real business world. My father chuckled nervously at the jokes, and Aunt Lisa leaned in with a fake smile, nodding at everything Kyle said. It was intentional. They were all complicit. I felt my chest tighten, a mix of betrayal, humiliation, and anger washing over me in waves. This wasn't just favoritism anymore. It was a coordinated effort to sideline me, to make me look foolish while celebrating my brother. The breaking point came when Kyle casually mentioned a trip he had taken recently, one that I had only learned about through the grapevine. He described how he had used a portion of our father's gift, the inheritance that was all his, to fund a lavish vacation for his family. He spoke with pride about the luxury villas, the fine dining, and the exclusive excursions, all while making sure to emphasize how responsible he had been in budgeting it. My stomach churned as I realized the depth of his audacity. This was the money my family had spent years convincing me was too valuable for someone like me, money that I had been excluded from discussing or even mentioning, and he had blown a significant portion on indulgence. I couldn't take it anymore. My voice rose slightly, controlled but unmistakable, and I asked him directly, "Kyle, what about the people who were supposed to benefit from this inheritance? The extended family, the charity fund Dad mentioned last year? Did they get any of this?" The room went silent. Kyle froze, his confident mask slipping for just a fraction of a second before he recovered with a laugh. "Oh, come on, Jack. That's old news. It's not like anyone really needed it, and we're all better off this way." He shrugged, as if dismissing the responsibility entirely. My father's face went pale, and Aunt Lisa's hand flew to her mouth. It was one thing for Kyle to look foolish on his own. It was another for him to openly disregard the family's expectations in front of everyone, especially while including me in the room. And the worst part? They weren't defending me. None of them were. I realized, with a sinking feeling, that I wasn't just excluded from the conversation. I was actively being undermined, humiliated, and erased. I wanted to lash out, to scream, to make them see the injustice, but I held it together. My heart pounded in my chest. My hands trembled slightly, but I forced myself to take a deep breath and sit back, letting the weight of my fury simmer. I could feel the anger coiling inside me like a spring, ready to be released at the right moment. This wasn't about childish revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my place in a family that had spent years pretending I didn't matter. After the meeting, I walked home in a daze, replaying every interaction, every smug grin, every dismissive comment. I realized that this was bigger than I thought. It wasn't just favoritism. It was a coordinated effort to maintain a hierarchy where Kyle was untouchable and I was expendable. My father had literally declared my inheritance off limits. My aunt had nodded in agreement, and my brother had shamelessly misused the money while keeping me in the dark. By the time I reached my apartment, I knew I couldn't let this go. I wasn't going to confront them in anger, not yet. That would only make me predictable, easy to dismiss. No, I needed a plan. I needed to make them see the consequences of underestimating me, of treating me as if I didn't belong. And more than that, I needed them to understand that I had been watching all along, quietly, patiently, and with a sharp memory for every slight, every insult, every deliberate exclusion. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop again, the familiar glow illuminating my determined face. I started gathering evidence, making careful notes, and tracing back every instance of favoritism, mismanagement, and hypocrisy. I wasn't going to act recklessly. I needed strategy, patience, and precision. This wasn't about immediate satisfaction. It was about making sure they couldn't ignore me again. As the night deepened, I leaned back in my chair and allowed myself a small, private smile. They thought they could dismiss me, humiliate me, and keep me in the background forever. But now I knew the truth. The scales were beginning to tip. The breaking point had arrived, and I could feel it in my bones. Everything that had happened, the favoritism, the snide remarks, the exclusion, the betrayal, had led me here. I was no longer just the ignored son. I was someone who had seen the whole picture, someone who had the patience and cunning to turn it to my advantage. The days after that dinner and Kyle's betrayal felt heavier than anything I had experienced in a long time. I went through the motions at work, but my mind kept replaying the scene over and over. The smug way Kyle had dismissed my questions, the forced smiles of my parents, Aunt Lisa's silent complicity. Every time I thought about it, I felt this mix of rage and hurt that refused to subside. It wasn't just the money. It was the principle, the years of subtle and not-so-subtle messages that I didn't matter, that I would always be second, that my life, my choices, my hard work, none of it would ever be enough to earn the respect I deserved. I think that was the lowest point. The realization that the people I had trusted the most, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, had actively sided against me. I couldn't even turn to my mother for support anymore. She had started echoing their opinions about Kyle being more responsible and family-oriented, and I knew she genuinely believed it. It wasn't malice on her part, at least not all of it, but it was another blow, another reminder that I was invisible in the eyes of my family. I had nowhere to go, no one to lean on, and no outlet for my frustration that wouldn't be dismissed as whining or jealousy. For the first time in a long time, I cried, not quietly, not in private, but really let the weight of everything hit me. I sank to my bedroom floor, staring at the carpet and thinking about all the moments I had been dismissed, belittled, and overlooked. Every birthday where Kyle got the best gift and I got a polite card. Every holiday where my accomplishments were ignored in favor of his. Every conversation where my opinions were dismissed. I felt like a ghost in my own life. And for a few days, I allowed myself to stay there, to wallow, to feel the sting and bitterness fully. But, as much as it hurt, something else began to emerge from the wreckage. A quiet, burning determination. I realized that if I continued to let them define my worth, I would be perpetually trapped in this cycle of humiliation and invisibility. I had to take control, not by fighting them directly or demanding recognition, but by quietly rebuilding myself, by proving to myself first and foremost that I mattered, that I was capable of more than they had ever allowed me to believe. I started small. I spent more hours at work, not obsessively, but strategically, taking on projects that allowed me to showcase my skills in ways my family couldn't ignore, even if they weren't present to witness it. I joined professional networks and online forums, learning the ins and outs of investments, business management, and entrepreneurship. Slowly, methodically, I was building a foundation for myself, something solid and unshakable that didn't depend on my family's approval. At the same time, I began to pay attention to Kyle's patterns. I started following his business ventures online, quietly observing his spending habits, the projects he invested in, the mistakes he made. I wasn't spying maliciously. I was collecting information, building a mental map of his weaknesses, of the moments where his confidence could be his undoing. And there were many. He was careless, overconfident, and completely unprepared for real scrutiny. Every reckless decision he had made in the past, and continued to make, was a potential lever for me to use when the time came. I also started reconnecting with my own circle of friends and colleagues, people who genuinely valued me for who I was and recognized my skills and intellect. That network became my anchor, my reminder that my worth wasn't dictated by the biased opinions of a family that had repeatedly underestimated me. I realized that I had been defining myself through their lens for far too long, and that lens was warped and dangerous. By rebuilding my confidence and independence, I was reclaiming control over my life, piece by piece. It wasn't easy. Some days were worse than others. There were moments when I still imagined calling my dad and telling him off, moments when I wanted to confront Kyle and expose him immediately, but I held myself back. Anger, I realized, was a tool, but only if wielded strategically. Reacting in the heat of the moment would only make me predictable and reinforce the narrative they had built about me being impulsive or inferior. Patience became my weapon. Observation became my ally. And slowly, the idea of revenge started to take a more refined shape, not about hurting them, but about reclaiming what was mine and making them confront their arrogance. One pivotal moment came about 3 weeks after the family barbecue. I received a call from a colleague at work about a potential freelance project that required someone with precision, attention to detail, and a reputation for integrity. It was high profile, and if I succeeded, it could significantly boost my professional standing. I poured myself into the project, staying up late, double-checking every number, every calculation, every strategy. I wasn't just proving my competence to myself anymore. I was building credibility in the wider world, somewhere my family couldn't ignore. When the project launched successfully, the praise and recognition were immediate. Clients and colleagues alike were impressed, sending emails and messages that lauded my work. I felt a rush of satisfaction that had nothing to do with my family, yet it was deeply personal. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to feel proud, not because my father or Kyle would notice, but because I had accomplished something real, something tangible, something I had built with my own hands and mind. But I didn't stop there. I used the momentum to quietly start an investment portfolio of my own, carefully researching and diversifying in ways Kyle had never considered. I tracked opportunities, learned the pitfalls from his mistakes, and even found a few small ventures that showed promise. Each success, each step forward, reinforced the idea that I didn't need their validation. I could create wealth, security, and recognition on my own terms. Even as I rebuilt myself, I remained acutely aware of my family's ongoing arrogance. Every holiday invitation I declined, every dinner I skipped, every polite conversation I navigated without giving in, they were all small acts of defiance, subtle reminders that I was no longer the passive observer in their little kingdom. I started collecting details, documenting interactions, and quietly noting Kyle's mismanagement of funds, Dad's favoritism, and Aunt Lisa's manipulations. It was becoming clearer that when the time came, I would have all the evidence I needed to confront them not with anger, but with undeniable proof. By the time a month had passed, I was beginning to feel a strange sense of exhilaration. I had been pushed down, humiliated, and excluded, but I wasn't broken. In fact, I was stronger than ever. The humiliation had forged something in me, a careful, strategic, relentless determination to reclaim what had been denied to me. Every success I achieved quietly, every step forward, was another brick in the foundation I was building for my eventual confrontation with my family. And then came the moment that made me realize I was ready to move from quiet rebuilding to subtle action. I received an email from a mutual business contact who had previously worked with Kyle. In it, they mentioned that Kyle had made a series of investments that were not only poorly considered, but potentially fraudulent in nature. The email was tentative, almost cautious, but the implications were staggering. Kyle had left himself exposed, and the information could be leveraged in ways that would make the truth unavoidable for everyone involved. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen, my mind already racing through possibilities. The pieces were falling into place. My rebuilding had not only restored my confidence and independence, it had positioned me perfectly to turn the tables. Kyle's recklessness, combined with my strategic patience, could be used to expose him without me ever having to appear aggressive or desperate. It would be precise, calculated, and devastatingly effective. And in that moment, I realized something fundamental. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice, about reclaiming my life and my worth from people who had spent decades telling me I didn't matter. The humiliation, the favoritism, the betrayal, they had all been fuel, and now that fuel was powering a plan that was quietly, meticulously, taking shape. I closed my laptop with a sense of satisfaction that I hadn't felt in years. The path forward wasn't easy, but I knew it was mine to walk. I would rise from the shadows, from the quiet pain and the subtle contempt, and when the time came, I would make them see that the sun they dismissed, the invisible one, was not only present but unstoppable. The thing about finally having a plan is that it changes the way you breathe. For months I'd been treading water, hurt, angry, rebuilding, but without a direction. Once I had that email mentioning Kyle's questionable investments and the pile of receipts and documents I'd already collected, everything snapped into focus. Revenge, in the way I wanted it, wasn't going to be a messy blow-up or a dramatic public meltdown. It would be surgical. It would be undeniable. It would force them to confront facts, not feelings. And for the first time in my life, the idea of making them squirm for having written me out felt almost clean, empowering, necessary. I started with logistics. I turned a spare shelf in my apartment into a command center, folders, color-coded tabs, a notebook with neat columns labeled date/event/evidence/witness/possible leverage. I created a timeline of every significant family interaction over the last 5 years, who said what, when the inheritance had been discussed, which relatives had been excluded from conversations, and where Kyle's spending spikes lined up with his so-called business activities. I printed emails, saved screenshots, and scanned old photos. Every piece felt like a tile in a mosaic that, when assembled, would form an image they couldn't argue with. Gathering allies wasn't about recruiting an army. It was about quiet alliances and credibility. I reached out to 2 people I trusted implicitly. Lena, an old friend who now worked in compliance for a mid-sized bank, and Omar, a former college roommate who had gone on to become a paralegal. Both of them had seen me at my lowest and knew how calm I could be when I needed to be. I didn't spin grand conspiracies. I didn't beg for help. I simply explained the facts I'd uncovered, showed them what I had, and asked for their professional eyes. Lena's reaction was the first real thing that felt like vindication. She looked through Kyle's public filings and the snippets I'd dug up and, after a long silence, said, "Jack, this isn't just careless. This is sloppy enough that someone could question the legality of his reporting." She advised me on how to preserve digital evidence in a way that would be tough to dispute later. Hashes, time-stamped copies, chain of custody notes. Omar, more pragmatic, started drawing up a list of people who would be useful to have on my side discreetly. A local accountant who had worked with Kyle before, a journalist friend who covered small business corruption, and a former associate of my dad's who had grown increasingly skeptical of how the family funds were handled. I was careful. I didn't want the family to sense the net being woven. For all their arrogance, they were perceptive when it came to any threat that smelled like drama. So everything was done in whispers, in emails that had nothing in them but attachments and dates, in phone calls taken on my walk home from work. I learned how to talk like someone who was calm because they were composed, not because they were hiding panic. Which, in a way, I was. But it was a controlled panic, purposeful, focused, and getting stronger every day. Parallel to building my evidence base, I began a campaign of small strategic moves designed to put pressure on Kyle's public persona. I didn't spread rumors. I didn't forge documents. I simply started letting the world around him show his cracks in a way that would be hard to pin on me. At networking events, I asked pointed questions about transparency that made him shift in his seat. I posted articles about ethical investing on my professional social feeds, with measured comments about due diligence. Nothing accusatory, just enough to nudge people who followed both of us to reconsider what they thought. I quietly made sure my contacts who had business dealings with him received my revised resume and portfolio, not to steal clients, but so that the market would start to recognize me as someone who could be trusted where he could not. My father, predictably, remained both oblivious and reactive. He sent the occasional passive text, "Are you coming to Sunday?" which I ignored or delayed. He tried to draw me back in with calls about trivial family updates, as if nothing had changed. I let him. Keeping him comfortable made the eventual reveal hit harder. The calmer the environment, the more stunned they'd be when the dam broke. Aunt Lisa, who fancied herself the family's moral arbiter, did the rounds with other relatives, spreading versions of the narrative that portrayed me as sulking and unstable. She didn't know I'd invited an outsider, a woman named Claire, an accountant I'd met through Omar, to casually cross-check one of Kyle's recent business summaries at a family brunch I'd accepted an invite to attend. Claire was professional and discreet. She agreed to attend under the pretense of being an old friend visiting town. Her presence would be useful later, but for now she was simply another eye. The most delicate piece was preparing for the emotional warfare. They'd try to gaslight me, guilt me, or paint me as vengeful. It's what families like mine do when someone dares to challenge the status quo. I rehearsed responses. I practiced the art of the calm delivery in front of a mirror. Let them talk, listen with a nonchalant face, and then place one fact on the table. Don't wave your arms. Don't shout. Let the evidence speak. Let them argue against documentation if they must. It'll only make them look defensive. My notebook became littered with phrases like, "I thought you should know. I pulled these records. And isn't it strange that?" Simple sentences, surgical in their effect. At work, I pushed my profile higher without making it look contrived. I volunteered to lead a transparency audit on a small joint venture. Nothing to do with family, everything to do with reputation. It gave me plausible credibility should anyone ask why I cared about documentation and oversight. It also provided the perfect cover. My expertise on governance would make it natural for me to ask questions in family meetings about Kyle's investment performance, appearing curious rather than accusatory. The more I cultivated this professional facade, the more comfortable I felt moving in the circles where Kyle had influence. If you can match their language, you steal their tools. I also found tiny psychological levers to pull. Kyle loved to be seen as generous and family first. He lived off the aura of being a provider. I used that against him by praising him in front of others for small, inconsequential acts. "Nice of you to bring the kids a gift," I'd say, loud enough for his ego to swell. People would watch him preen. Then later I'd drop a neutral question about how that gift was funded. The result was always the same: defensiveness that led to careless admissions or, at least, tension. It's funny how arrogance makes people sloppy. The more they believe their own myths, the more likely they were to slip up. As I assembled the legal and financial puzzle pieces, I also started to think about timing. There had to be a moment that would maximize impact. A charity gala comes to mind, something where the family's reputation is put on display. I noted dates of local events, fundraisers, and community meetings where my family was often in the spotlight. If I could time a reveal around one of those public-facing nights, the shame would reverberate beyond the living room. It would become social currency in the community they prized so highly. They'd feel the humiliation not just personally, but where their peers could see it. That kind of pressure is corrosive, and it would do the job of forcing uncomfortable conversations at Thanksgiving tables and church groups alike. But I wasn't reckless. Before I chose a public stage, I wanted a private blow that would unsettle them and make Aunt Lisa and Dad look like they'd failed to protect what they'd touted as sacred. A personal betrayal, something that would crack the veneer of family unity. I started keeping a folder labeled "Private," a collection of emails and receipts tying Kyle's investments to questionable vendors, and a ledger of how much of the inheritance had been diverted to personal luxuries. There were photographic proofs, hotel reservations with names, invoices for high-end purchases, and messages he'd carelessly sent about covering the difference when one of his projects went belly up. Each piece was a contradiction of the story he loved to tell, that he was responsible, that he managed money for the good of the family. The more I dug, the more I realized how open a target he was. He'd signed contracts with vague clauses, he'd entrusted funds to people I could track, and, crucially, he'd bragged to the exact people who could corroborate his missteps, friends who turned into witnesses if I needed them to. I made discreet calls. I asked pointed questions. I never hinted at what I was building. People were forthcoming. Arrogance invites confession. The ledger started to swell. At the same time, I staged small acts of detachment that would look meaningful when the reveal happened. I declined to host family events. I stopped attending the Sunday dinners where they discussed Kyle's latest vision. I sent text replies that were measured and slightly distant. Sounds like a good plan. Let me know how it goes. It annoyed Dad. It flummoxed Aunt Lisa. Most importantly, it changed the optics. When the time came, I would not look like the desperate sibling trying to drag someone down. I'd be the calm one, the one who had quietly cataloged truth. There were nights I lay awake, thinking of consequences. What if my father disowned me? What if they accused me of fabrication? What if Kyle's pride turned into something darker? I thought of the lonely nights, the emotional cost, the friends who'd be dragged in. But the anger that had once felt raw and destructive had transformed into something colder and more precise. I wasn't trying to punish for punishment's sake. I was trying to correct a narrative that had been weaponized against me my entire life. This was a reclamation, an act of setting the story straight. If the truth cost them their illusions, so be it. As I tightened the net, I began to test their reactions in calibrated ways. A cousin I'd always been close to, Elise, sent me a passive message about Kyle's brave decisions. I responded with a neutral, "Is he seeing a financial advisor for that?" The message thread ended awkwardly. A week later, I made a point of praising a small, irrelevant success of mine in front of Dad at a family lunch, and watched the tiny, jealous flicker that passed through his eyes. These micro-tests weren't cruel, they were data points. Each reaction taught me how to phrase the eventual confrontation so it landed with maximum uncomfortableness. And then came the perfect accidental gift. My father, in an attempt to demonstrate his continued support for Kyle, forwarded me an innocuous photo from one of Kyle's family nights, a group shot with Dad smiling, Kyle's kids clutching toys, and Aunt Lisa beaming beside them. He captioned it, "Family doing well. Thought you'd like to see." It was a small thing, except the photo included, in the background, what looked to be an expensive piece of art that I recognized from a gallery's promotional post the year before, an exhibit that had been paid for by someone my father owed money to. The art, the dates, the gallery's notes, it was a thread. And threads can unravel entire sweaters. I printed the photo and, in tiny handwriting at the bottom of my notebook, penciled a plan. I would not act in haste. I would wait for a family function where the stakes were social credibility and legacy, the kind of event where my father wanted to be seen as the patriarch, the man who made wise financial decisions for the family. I would present the evidence to Aunt Lisa privately, then to Dad, and if they refused to face it, I would make it public in a way that could not be ignored. I pictured their faces when the receipts matched the stories they told themselves. Disbelief, then anger, then the staggered realization of how badly they'd been misled. The image made my gut clench in a way that was both satisfying and terrifying. By late afternoon on a chilly Tuesday, everything felt like it was aligned. Claire had agreed to sit with me once more to review Kyle's ledgers. Lena had promised to prepare a technical report on irregular transfers. Omar had compiled a contact list of witnesses who would corroborate timelines. I slipped the last printed ledger into a folder and labeled it, simply, "When the time comes." The label felt oddly ceremonial. I made myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the street below, where ordinary life moved with oblivious steadiness. I thought of Dad mowing the lawn that morning, of Aunt Lisa fussing with a tablecloth, of Kyle teaching his child to ride a bike. Mundane, human moments that would be disrupted soon. It made the plan feel less like vengeance and more like a necessary correction to a life lived on lies. There was one more piece I needed, a setting where their pride would be front and center and where the fallout could not easily be swept under the rug. I scanned the local charity events calendar and found it. A gala in 2 weeks, the very fundraiser where Dad had promised to speak about family values and the importance of stewardship. It was the perfect stage. If I timed the revelation to occur either just before his speech or at some point during the evening when the community leaders were gathered, it would force a confrontation that would reach beyond our living room and into the world they cared most about. I could see it all in my head. The outrage, the awkward silences, the whispered questions among people who had always admired my father. The humiliation would be public, startling, and, importantly, difficult to refute quickly. But doing it there also carried risk. If I made a misstep, If the evidence had a gap, the backlash would be severe. My reputation could be ruined as quickly as theirs. And that thought made my hands tremble slightly as I closed the folder. I lit a candle and sat with the weight of what I had built. This was no longer just about proving a point. It was about forcing change in a family that had become comfortable telling itself a story that wasn't true. For better or worse, the next move would alter everything. I felt a pang for the mother who sincerely believed what she'd been told, for the cousins who loved the family uncritically. But I also felt a hard, bright certainty. I had reached the point of no return. The plan was in motion, the allies were ready, and the stage was set. The gala was 2 Fridays away. I could hold it. I could wait. I could sharpen each piece of evidence until there was no frayed edge to be grabbed for a defense. I could rehearse the delivery, the nonchalance, the calm. I poured the rest of my tea and, with a steady hand, slid the "when the time comes" folder into the top drawer of my desk and closed it. For the first time in months, I slept without constant dread, but the dream that night was a fractured collage of banquet halls, whispered conspiracies, and the sound of Dad's polite applause at the wrong moment. Morning came with a strange hush. My phone buzzed, an invitation reminder from Aunt Lisa about the gala. Her message was cheery, oblivious. "Can't wait to see you there, Jack. Dress nice." I stared at the text, the screen reflecting my face like a mirror of intent. I typed, then deleted, then typed again, "I'll be there." I hit send. It was the easiest lie I'd told in months, and the one that felt the most honest. I had agreed to be present for the show, and now all that remained was deciding exactly when to pull the curtain back. The plan sat quiet in the drawer like a sleeping animal, and I knew waking it would change everything. I poured another cup of coffee, looked at myself in the kettle's reflection, and realized how calm I was, how coldly certain. The family believed they were the authors of the narrative. They were about to find out I'd been keeping detailed notes. Somewhere between the second cup and packing my briefcase for work, Claire emailed, "I've got the accounts reconciled. Available to meet Wednesday evening. Lena will have the technical summary." Omar added a short line, "Witness list ready. We should coordinate the sequence." My chest tightened in a way that felt like a starting pistol. I closed my laptop, slid the folder back into the drawer, and then, on a small, irrational impulse, picked up the old family photo from the mantel. Dad with his arm around Kyle at some graduation, Aunt Lisa smiling in the background. For a second, the image pierced me with a nostalgic ache. These were my people, messy and flawed and human. But the ache was different now. It was not pity. It was a recognition that I'd spent years shrinking to fit into their story. Tomorrow, I thought, the shrinking would stop. The gala was in 2 weeks. The countdown began, and with each day, the pieces would come closer to aligning. I felt strangely calm as I walked out the door. The plan had a momentum of its own now. All I could do was keep adding small calibrations, double-check the ledgers, ensure witness availability, confirm Claire's attendance, and wait for the night where truth would demand center stage. As I locked my apartment and headed down the stairs, my phone buzzed again. It was a single text from Kyle, "See you Friday. Don't be weird." I smiled despite myself. He had no idea how accurate that text was about to be. I typed a reply, casual and cool. Wouldn't dream of it. Then I hit send and kept walking, the city swallowing my steps as the plan, once quiet and private, began its slow, deliberate walk toward daylight. The drawer clicked shut behind me, and in that small sound I heard the beginning of a reckoning. The night of the gala, I felt the same strange mixture of anticipation and calm that had carried me through the previous weeks. The city glittered outside the hall's tall windows, the lights reflecting like tiny sparks of the storm I had been quietly brewing. I arrived early, deliberately, dressed sharply but not ostentatiously, carrying only my briefcase. Inside were the compiled documents, the reconciled ledgers, the witness list, and Claire's notes. Every piece had been meticulously verified. Nothing could be dismissed as hearsay or emotion. Everything was fact. Cold, undeniable, irrefutable fact. My family, of course, was already there. Dad was in his element, the charming patriarch of the evening, shaking hands and making small talk with donors. Aunt Lisa fluttered around like she owned the room, dropping compliments and asking for toasts with her usual self-satisfied precision. Kyle stood near the center, regaling a small group of acquaintances with tales of his responsible investments and the sacrifices he'd made for family. I could see it all, cataloging the pride, the smugness, the unearned confidence. My pulse remained steady. I had waited for this moment, and every minute of anticipation made the next move sweeter. I positioned myself near the bar, casually sipping a glass of sparkling water, and waited for the right moment. Claire was seated at a nearby table, eyes scanning the room but alert, signaling subtly with hand gestures we had prearranged. Lena and Omar were out of sight, quietly monitoring the event through phone calls and text updates. Every ally was in place. All I had to do was initiate the sequence. The first move was subtle, a casual conversation with a prominent guest who had connections to Kyle's ventures. I was curious about some of the small business filings in town, I said lightly. I noticed a few discrepancies in a few of Kyle's recent projects. Nothing confirmed yet, but I'm keeping an eye on it. The guest's eyebrows raised, and I offered a polite shrug. That was all it took. Rumors in the right circles moved faster than any accusation shouted across a room. Kyle, unfortunately for him, was in the perfect position to overreact, and overreaction was exactly what I wanted. Then came the pivot. As Dad moved toward the podium to give his speech on stewardship and family responsibility, I excused myself and quietly asked Claire to place the folder in a location where Aunt Lisa would inevitably notice it. Her favorite waiting room near the coat check, a place she always lingered before introductions. I then made my way toward the center of the room, in plain sight, as though I were just another attendee. Aunt Lisa, as predicted, noticed the folder immediately. She picked it up, glanced at it, and her eyes widened in a way that betrayed her carefully maintained composure. For a moment, she thought it might be irrelevant paperwork. Then she flipped it open. The documents fell into place, the ledgers, the invoices, the reconciled accounts, the clearly labeled mismanagement. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. She made a sound like a gasp, which drew a few curious onlookers. I didn't rush. I didn't confront her. I simply approached and said softly, "You might want to look at this carefully." Her fingers trembled slightly as she flipped through the papers. I could see the realization dawn on her face, then the panic. She knew, in that moment, that this wasn't something she could manage with charm or misdirection. Kyle, noticing the commotion, hurried over. "Lisa, what is?" His voice faltered when he saw me standing beside her. I met his gaze evenly, quietly, with no trace of anger, only calm precision. "It's just some documentation about your recent investments," I said. "I thought you'd want to see it before Dad gives his speech." The words were simple, neutral, almost casual, but the effect was instantaneous. Kyle's confident smirk vanished. Dad, mid-podium, turned to see what was happening. I watched the blood drain from his face as Aunt Lisa, who had been his staunchest supporter, held the folder up for him to see. For the first time in years, the patriarch looked like an ordinary man, startled, uncertain, exposed. The evidence spoke for itself. Receipts and invoices showed luxury spending disguised as family expenses. Ledger entries revealed transfers that contradicted Kyle's public claims. Emails and texts exposed casual acknowledgments of mismanagement and deliberate obfuscation. Claire stepped forward discreetly and added her professional opinion. The reconciled accounts clearly demonstrated discrepancies that couldn't be ignored. Her calm, factual delivery left no room for misinterpretation. Kyle stuttered, trying to explain, but every word he spoke only reinforced the documentation. The guests, many of whom were influential in local business circles, began to murmur. Questions were asked, polite, controlled, but loaded. I watched as the carefully constructed narrative Kyle had spent years cultivating began to unravel in real time. His pride, his shield, shattered before a room full of witnesses. Aunt Lisa's usual assertiveness crumbled. She glanced at Dad, then at Kyle, realizing the full extent of the exposure. For the first time, she had no ready defense, no poised commentary to redirect blame. Dad's face was ashen, his voice quivering when he tried to intervene. "Jack, this isn't how," he trailed off, flustered. I interrupted gently, not raising my voice. "It's exactly how, Dad. I just collected the facts." The room fell into a tense, almost reverent silence. The social currency my family had relied on, their charm, their stories, their assumed moral authority, was gone, replaced by the cold clarity of documented truth. People who had admired them looked uncertain. People who had trusted Kyle now questioned everything. The humiliation wasn't just personal. It was public, undeniable, irreversible. Kyle's shoulders slumped. He attempted a weak smile, tried to argue, but his words sounded hollow. Dad tried to salvage something, tried to insist that the situation could be explained away, but the documents spoke louder than anything he could say. Aunt Lisa's usual manipulative commentary evaporated. She could only stand frozen, clutching the folder like a lifeline. I felt a quiet satisfaction, not from cruelty, but from justice. For years, I had been dismissed, belittled, and erased. Now, for the first time, my family had to acknowledge the truth. The narrative they had spent decades controlling had been corrected, quietly but irrevocably, by someone they had underestimated, me. After the initial shock, the fallout was swift. Kyle faced serious scrutiny from business contacts. A few ventures he had touted were temporarily frozen pending independent review. Dad's credibility in the community took an immediate hit. He had championed Kyle's decisions publicly, and now they were clearly flawed. Aunt Lisa, known for her judgmental lectures, had to retreat quietly, her authority undermined by the very evidence she had failed to scrutinize. Even the extended family, previously complicit in ignoring my exclusion, began asking questions, subtle, probing, but unmistakably shifting in focus toward Kyle and the mismanaged inheritance. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I remained calm, polite, and neutral, answering questions only when necessary. Every time Kyle attempted to redirect blame toward me, the documents proved him wrong. Every attempt to gaslight or deflect was met with calm, factual clarity. By the end of the evening, the tension had shifted entirely. I wasn't the wrong child anymore. I was the one holding the narrative. I had taken what was mine by right, credibility, visibility, and the undeniable truth, and presented it with precision and care. When the gala concluded, I quietly collected my belongings. I glanced at my father, who avoided eye contact, at Kyle, who slouched with embarrassment, at Aunt Lisa, who tried to smile but failed. I knew that the family hierarchy had shifted. The years of favoritism, manipulation, and exclusion were no longer unchallenged. I had planted a seed that would grow into a permanent recalibration of how they viewed me, and perhaps how they viewed themselves. Walking out into the crisp night air, I felt a sense of release I hadn't known in years. The weight of their favoritism, the sting of betrayal, the humiliation I had endured, it was no longer mine to bear. I had reclaimed my agency, my dignity, and my voice. And most importantly, I had done it with precision, strategy, and calm. I hadn't needed to yell, beg, or plead. I hadn't needed to destroy them completely. I had only needed to reveal the truth, and the truth had done the rest. For the first time in a long while, I felt free. Free from the shadow of my family's expectations, free from their narratives, free from the constant feeling of being overlooked. I knew there would be conversations, apologies, defenses, and attempts to rebuild pride. But none of that would undo what had been revealed. The truth was permanent, and I had wielded it carefully. As I walked toward my car, I thought back to the countless nights spent cataloging, analyzing, and rebuilding. The anger that had once felt consuming had transformed into patience, precision, and quiet satisfaction. The weight of the past had been lifted not by confrontation, but by preparation and timing. I opened my car door, placed the briefcase on the passenger seat, and took a deep breath. The city lights shimmered around me, and I smiled softly to myself. For the first time, I realized that reclaiming one's power didn't have to be loud or dramatic. It could be quiet, methodical, and undeniably effective. And in that moment, I felt the rare and exhilarating clarity of knowing I had won, and I had done so on my own terms. The night was calm, the air crisp, and the streets emptying as I drove away. The family I had once feared, the people who had dismissed me, underestimated me, and humiliated me, they had finally learned a simple truth. Never underestimate the quiet one who has been watching all along.